It's June, nearly halfway through the year. Picture selection for the 2026 calendar is almost complete. Our first calendar sales booking for Christmas has been made, and some of the photographs that are selected for this year's calendar will be used for a repeat of the note cards that we produced previously. Thinking of presents from calendar photographs. Oh, I told you that. Thank you for purchasing raffle tickets. It helps to keep membership fees unchanged and pays for the group hire for our meetings. What happened on this day? Well, as you probably heard on the news today, 1944, D-Day Operation Overlord landed 400,000 Allied American, British and Canadian troops on the beaches of Normandy in German-occupied France. In 1930, you may not know this, not everybody does, frozen foods are sold commercially for the first time on this day in 1930. In 1868, Robert Falcon Scott, the British explorer, was born. You probably don't remember this, but in 1641, Spain loses Portugal. I think the score was 2-0, but that's right. Next month, July the 4th, another day in history, of course, we welcome back Adrian Hughes and the cancelled due to weather January talk entitled Llandudno in World War II. But tonight, we welcome back Robert Jones. Robert is going to talk to us about the remarkable Mr Pochin. Robert, over to you. Thank you.
I must warn you, I spent most of the day rewriting this, so it's new to me as well. I've spoken about Mr Pochin to you before when I spoke about the railway to Dissen, because he owned estates up there, and he wanted to put a railway through to Hollywood. But of course he was very active in Prestatyn, as you probably know. So that's why I call him remarkable. Have you ever noticed this in Prestatyn?
Yes.
It reads, in memory of Henry Davis Pochin Esquire, Botnant Hall, Denbighshire, who by his forthright public spirit and useful work initiated the development of Prestatyn. You probably know that he lived in Botnant House, and you might have heard of his daughter Laura, a most formidable lady and most overlooked. You'll see later. She was a suffragette. Sadly, she's only remembered for this. The Rhuddlan Mark. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Right, Botnant, there she is. She's a suffragette, and there's the Rhuddlan Arch. Prestatyn wouldn't have been the same without her father or herself. He was born the son of a yeoman farmer, and his family seat was at Barkby Hall, near Leicester. Sorry, I'm having trouble with this thing. I'm pushing the wrong button, I think that's what it is. Barkby Hall near Leicester. Go the right way this time. He never attended university. After school, he began a 5-year apprenticeship, and he was with an industrial chemist in Northampton. But after further apprenticeships, he eventually passed his Pharmaceutical Society exams. That was in 1847. His father rewarded him with £600, and he was able to buy himself into a partnership. £65,000 that would be worth now. He got married, Agnes Heap, 1852, and she was actually the sister of one of his partners. And he had no idea what he was letting himself in for. She looks understood, doesn't she? She wasn't. She was a suffragette. But not that sort. She was the sort with a brain. And she was, when she first came to public note, she wrote one of the very first books on being a suffragette. It which was called The Right of Women to Exercise the Elective Franchise. And her husband totally supported her. And what isn't realised is that Henry Pochin practically subsidised the suffragette movement. Yeah. So, her fame is she was one of the first three speakers at the very first, I suppose you'd call it a convention now, which was at Manchester in 1868. And her daughter Laura was with her. Anyway, Henry Pochin, he entered into local politics back in 1853 on Salford City Council, and he served as mayor. And then he was elected as an MP in 1868, but he was unseated because there were complaints of intimidation against his agent and supporters. He tried for Parliament again in the 1870s, but he failed and he never bothered again. In 1865, he had factories in Salford, Bristol and Newcastle. He's making a lot of money. And he never rested. He was always inventing new processes. He invented a process for making white soap by blowing steam through pine resin, and if it's still used. But rather than actually manufacture the soap himself, he sold the processes, and then he used that money to reinvest in research. For instance, he discovered a way of making paper better for printing by sizing it, coating it with white china clay. He bought several china clay pits in Cornwall because he needed very fine quality white clay. He became extremely wealthy. I didn't have a picture of British, sorry, it's American money now. He started investing in stock companies, mostly iron and steel. He was the director on 22 different companies. He'd been living at Broughton Old Hall in Salford, but in 1870 he decided to move down south, and he went to Barn Elms in Surrey. And suddenly he became interested in agriculture, because you must understand up until this time, he was the very model of the Stark Satanic Mill type person, you know, polluting the atmosphere and so on. Something happened. Perhaps his wife. He bought a Hurlford in Llandudno in 1871, and he developed the gardens there. And he also got an eye from North Wales. While he was living there, he became familiar with the Conwy Valley, and he bought Bodnid Hall in 1874. And he changed its name to Bodnant. And then he started making extensive alterations, and he moved in 2 years later. And it was fascinating because wherever he went, he took his names with him. And when he came to Prestatyn later on, the Bodnant reappears. And you'll see that when we get there. In March 1877, his daughter Laura married Charles McLaren. He was a wealthy barrister, landowner, and industrialist. And they were able to afford the services of a French impressionist painter to paint James Tisson. A few months later, the Golden Grove estate became available on the market. Have you ever been there? It's a Tudor house, and it describes it in the press act. Highly important sale of a fine old residential estate known as Golden Grove, comprising of 966 acres, 3 rods, 13 perches of pasture and arable land, all within ring fence, forming 2 sides of a beautiful valley, diversified with 5 fine covers, well stocked with game, and including the noble old mansion in pure early English style, beautifully situated and commanding views of unparalleled grandeur. But actually it failed to sell. So what Henry Pochin did, he made a private approach afterwards, and he bought it. He bought it for his daughter and son-in-law to live in. But it wasn't really quite that simple, because he was planning ahead. He had a scheme, and we'll see what it was. Well, they enlarged it, and they produced some very good gardens there too. So what was Pochin up to? Well, he was interested in Prestatyn. He was interested in developing Prestatyn. And to put it simply, he realised it was the first nice place with a beach and mountains and so on the the North Wales coast if you were coming in by train, which of course everybody did in those days. So it was a place worth investing in. Now, there's the parish of Melodon as it was in 1860. That's a Google Earth map. Parish of Melodon. And it used to stretch all the way down to the Frith, and it used to go as far as Sandy Lane in Prestatyn. So that yellow shade there is as it was until after 1860. But before that, it included the whole of Prestatyn and Nant as well. And that was the old parish of Melodon. Now I'm going to show you the Golden Grove estate. It's absolutely incredible. In 1879, Henry Pochin bought the Nant estate. There's the house. And it included half of Prestatyn. You see the smaller shade of green, that's the Nant estate. So that became his as well. This gave him complete possession of two very important features. You know what they are? Water. The only two sources of water for Prestatyn. One was Marion Hills, Asses Well, and the other was the Nant Pool, pond, whatever, down by the mill on Nant Hall Road. Sorry, that is my... I must get some ice from the back of my head. They used to use that pond for soaking flax to make linen. Now it's just ducks, of course. And I don't know if you've ever been around the back of that building. That's the old mill there. So it fed a mill to corn mill. And it was fed by 3 springs coming in from the hillside, which was good, clean water. Nant people were lucky because it was good, clean water. Most people were having to get their water from pumps in those days, or wells like that. That's the one on the side of the road opposite to the Hall Farm. And unfortunately, while the water was clean, people are not clean. It would be quite unpleasant at times. Even pumps like this one in Llanasa, which is situated over a well, even those were likely to be contaminated. Famous old Victorian cartoon showing how something could be contaminated. You've got a poor sickly old gentleman here going to his water closet, and then you've got the soil going into the water, the children playing in the gutter going into the water, washing going into the water, and I don't know what he's doing, he's going into the water. So they were easily contaminated. New laws came along to force the authorities to take action. The Victorian period was a time of lots of new regulations. Things were improving. And the Wrexham Guardian carried a report in 1878. It was a survey that had been done on local water by the medical officer of health for the St Asaph Union. The St Asaph Union was responsible for more than one council area. It was a union of councils. He describes Melodon. The village is supplied with water by a dip well at the east end of the village, which is exposed to risks of pollution by sewage. A roadside gutter, which receives refuse waters from a block of houses adjacent, passes in dangerous proximity to the well. It's probable that in March 1877, this well, so polluted that the water conveyed the infective poison of typhoid fever to some 4 families. And he's talking about Cofion. The locals called it typhoid terrace. Very picturesque. If you're not certain, that's the entrance. Push the one button. Right. It'll come back. There we are. So you've got that's the entrance to the church, that's the Lich Gate there, you see. And then that's the Red Line car park. And it was an L-shaped terrace with 10 dwellings, and it was awful. Only people who had nowhere else to live would end up there. In fact, there was only one worse place in the whole area. We'll come to that later. That will make you cringe. Right, lost myself. Oh, yes. So he's talking about typhoid terrace. Well, the authorities, they read the report, but they did nothing. But Henry Pochin, he was at the meeting and he thought about it. And suddenly, in the London Gazette, an application appeared to Parliament. He wanted to lay a water pipe from Marion Mills through Dizzer, down Meldon, all the way to Prestatyn, down High Street, and end up by the Victoria Hotel. The hotel wasn't there then, in Victoria Terrace. That was what he had in mind. And he had permission to do it. In fact, if you go up to Marion Mills now, the field just below where the water comes out, you can see that pipe, and that's one of Pochin's pipes. It's not used anymore, but it's still there. The press were fascinated. There would be reading reports on the progress of the pipe work. It ended up at Victoria Terrace in June 1883, and street taps started appearing everywhere along the route. You can probably guess it's Prestatyn High Street. There's the church. You're looking down High Street. There's one of Pochin's taps. It's not a pump because pumps have handles on. This is a tap, and to use it, there's a close-up. He's filling a container on the back of his cart, I think. To watch where you put your feet in those days. There's another one there. That's higher up the High Street. And that's lower down the High Street. That's King's Avenue going in there. And that's a blow-up photograph of that little bit of a pump, little tap. And if you paid Pochin, he'd give you one of those. It was a key. And you could go up to one of his taps. And there was a little hole there. You put the key in and you turned it. And then once you turned it, that thing there, you could turn the water on. You could fill in your bucket with it. Of course, there were people willing to start selling fake keys. And let's see, we've got a lady in Meldon there, Sarah Lewis. She got caught out. She had a key and she was fine. Well, anyway, with the availability of water, people started to install bathrooms. And kitchens. And this is how much he charged. At first I thought that's rather a lot, but it's per year. And the red figure, that's modern day equivalent. Practically as a month, I'm sure you want to. And if you had a bath, then a man would come along and measure it to see how much water it held. And you'd insist you could only have one bath a month and all this sort of stuff. If you had an additional toilet, you had to pay for that too. All very carefully calculated. Anyway, with all this money, he continued buying land. Now, it's worth getting to know this because I'm going to use this satellite photograph to show you how the bottom of Prestatyn developed. So, let's see what we've got. There's Pontins. That's the old racing track, isn't it? There's the railway. There's High Street. There's the shopping place, the new shopping place. There's the old market. You've got the idea now, yes? Right, there's the sea, in case you do. There's the railway. And I've superimposed a map from 1871 on the other side of the railway, because you see, eventually Pochin bought all that land, and when he bought it, it was mostly floodland and unusable, and we'll see how he developed it. So, there were very few buildings the other side of the railway, the sea side of the railway. I've highlighted what buildings there were in red. That's it. There was nothing else. Now there's High Street. I've already mentioned that. Before the railway was built, the High Street went all the way down to Bromley Square. Bromley Square is not a word we use now, but that's the Territorial Army, that crossroads there. Well, that was Bromley Square. So it went all the way down to Bromley Square. The coast road didn't exist, of course. There was a track there. And when the trains arrived, they had to put a level crossing there. That's the High Street up there. And here's looking the other way. So that row of cottages, that's the Victoria Hotel now. The Victoria Hotel was built about 1901, I think. Those houses are still there. Right, let's get back to that. Towin was a hamlet. Towin it's a word that means a sandy place. So Towin was there, and that's a map showing you what there was. There was a little chapel in there. I'll show you a photograph of it in a minute. And that's exactly the same place now. That's to scale. Everything is in the right place. In fact, if you are willing to sit down and search, you can find the chapel on that photograph. You can find several of the buildings. I'll show you some of them now. All right then, so we are. There's Towin as it is now. People don't know they live in Towin because it's a word that's gone out of use. But on Sandy Lane there are the old long cottages, and that marked the boundary of Melodon Parish at one time. Occasionally, in all that mix of buildings, you'll find an old Welsh longhouse. There must be about 5 or 6 of them there still. There's the chapel. It is actually on Chapel Street. It was put there by Rhuddlan Chapel. They regarded all the people that were moving into that area as heathens, and they were out to convert them, so it was like an outrigger chapel. And then, of course, to get from Towin, giving away all my secrets. What have I done now? It's ever since I went over to Windows 11, this thing doesn't behave the same way. Right, God Chapel. Right, we've covered. So, between Towin and the bottom of the High Street, there was a sandy track. Well, that eventually became Sandy Lane. And then there was another sandy track along there. That eventually became Victoria Road. And then Victoria Terrace was built there. And Victoria Terrace, there we are, recognise that. And it's always intriguing because you read reports of, before 1900, that road, there was just sand in front of it, just sand and marsh all the way down to what I still call the Lido, sorry. And they would have sand in their gardens. Quite different. Now, carrying on Victoria Road, there was another sandy track that went out there to the gutter. We call it Marine Road. They called it the Black Road. And the reason is that all the coal coming into Prestatyn came in to the harbour, and all the carts used to have to go along that road to get to the harbour, and the coal dust and so on. So apparently the road was actually quite black. And then we have the tidal inlet that we call the gutter. And there was a harbour there. And that's what it looks like now. It's just quite near one of the entrances of Pontins. So there it is on the map. The gutter. There we are. And nearby, there was an alkali works. I put a big arrow pointing at it. But even in Pochin's day, it was disused. Sometimes it was called the vitriol works. And the office is still there. It's on Warren Drive. You can see the Regency-style roof on the building, can't you? There was a terrace of slum dwellings on what we would call Caradog Road, but in those days it was called Cement Row. And when I was talking about Tycorkin, I told you about a place that was even worse. This is it. There. Cement Row. And the report about the living conditions there is absolutely unbelievable. For instance, they emptied their slops out into a gutter that passed, and they actually used to take their water from the same gutter for drinking and so on. They didn't understand. They weren't educated people, and they spent a lot of time trying to help them, but eventually it was destroyed. Not shocking place. Cement Row. Quite nearby there was the Royal Hotel, and that is still there, little bits of it. And then there was a cement company, the Portland Cement Company, and they made an awful lot of dust. And they were right next door to a school, and that was let me see, it was what they call it. It was the National School. No, sorry, it wasn't. It was the Non-Denominational Board School, and now we call it T. Caradog. It proved to be too small, and so eventually they built another one around the corner, and that's 1902, that's the National School. It took over from the one I just showed you. That's on Marine Road, and it was the land was donated by Laura McLaren. That was knocked down in 2018. And then the Church of England had its own school, and that was over in Bromley Square, next to the terrace, the terrace I was talking about earlier on. That's it there. That's the Church of England School, National School, Bromley Square. But by 1896, that was too small. And of course, you realise what's going on here. Prestatyn's developing. More and more people are moving in. And so everything has to be upgraded all the time. And so they had to build that in its place on the other side. And the great thing was, this had a playground. The other one didn't have a playground. Do you recognise it? So we're working back up towards the station, you see. So on the other side of the railway there was Station Road, and that's it in 1900. And then in 1911, the gardens were built, triangular-shaped gardens, to celebrate the coronation of George V. Why was all this possible? Well, over the previous 30 years, Henry Pochin had been draining the marshes, and more houses were being was a stream that contained all the water from the mines. And what he did was he created a culvert. So he could take it off towards the gutter. And then his next task was to, where it's green there, it's particularly marshy, his next task was to drain that. So he built an embankment all the way along from Barkby Beach to the Frith, and it consisted of bundles of wood which he had brought from his estate up at Golden Grove, tied in great bundles and laid, and then covered in sand. And you know it very well, you've walked on it. Those are not natural sand dunes, they were created by poaching. And when you've gone down to the old Frith and you've gone up and over that bump, you've been going over his sea defence. So it was very successful. The marshes dried out. So once the marshes were dry, he divided the whole lot up into building plots and put them on the market. Now, this area is still owned by Aberconwy Estates, because Aberconwy Estates were poachers' company, just a new name. You can see the patches of land. See, the holiday camp is down there, isn't it? That's the Frith there. That's the Frith. That's where you walked over. And then the holiday camp would be about there. Nova Lido would be about here. No, sorry, about there. And that's the road down to the present day Lido. And we're jumping with them. So he divided into plots for development, and people had always been walking down to the beach. So he created a more permanent road from Bromley Square all the way down. And at the end of it, that's what it looked like. Your back is to the Lido there, back to the Nova. And you're looking up Bastion Road. And the bastion, of course, is a stone structure which defends something. And he built a bastion on the end of it. That's why it's called Bastion Road. And there's his bastion. Can you see it there? Across there, that stone. This is a later photograph because he didn't put a shelter on. His daughter did that years later. But that's the bastion. And he called it Prestatyn Beach. Prestatyn Promenade. At first there were just a few benches and a shelter and a weighing machine. Always after the money. This is after 1899 because the Jubilee drinking fountains appeared. You see it? Now that bottom bit of it is the thing we looked at right at the very beginning. Except it's got all the inscription about the man himself on it. Nobody seems to know where the top part's gone. So that's after 1899 because his daughter put that there. The bathing machine operators soon discovered the beach. I can just imagine them pushing all the way from here. Doubt it. They probably would have to pay a franchise. And you could hire a tent. See that house there? That's not the Grand Hotel, that's called Beach House. You'll see that in a moment. It became very popular. So popular, it became overrun. So he built great big walls all the way from Prestatyn right down, so you couldn't go on his line. All the way down Bastion Road. The following year, he widened the track from the alkali works. So he's finished developing that bit. Now he's looking at this bit. There are the alkali works, and that's the harbour, and what do they call that now, that road? Barclay Avenue, isn't it? Yes, Barclay Avenue. So he called it Barclay Avenue, and that's a name that he brought with him after his family home in Leicester. And it also meant he had to build a new bridge. So he did. You go over that when you go down Barclay Avenue. You don't notice it, but it's there. It's right by the Pontins entrance. And at the end of Barclay Avenue, he built Stradbrook House. And it was a school, and later it became Prestatyn Golf House, Prestatyn Golf House. In 1926, it was made much bigger. That's the original Stradbrook House. And then it was extended and it became the Grand Hotel. It was called the Golf House Hotel, actually. I think it's called the Beaches now, isn't it? That was when it was the Grand Hotel. There's Stradbrook. That's the new bit. And very sad, wasn't it? And then it was sort of rebuilt again, became the Beaches. There's Stradbrook House still, hanging on. Again, none of this would have been there without Pochin's embankment. In 1890, he turned his attention to the Nant. What am I doing? Oh yes, and then after he built the hotel, he built a new road along there, joining the hotel with the Bastion, and he called it Beach Road. And on Beach Road he built himself a fine new house called Beach House, and it was for his summer holidays. If we put modern pontins on top, we can see how it all fits together. See Goubet's racing track there, still there, as large as life. Did you ever go to the trotting? I went once, there was a carnival on, and they put on a race for everybody to watch, trying to get more customers. It was quite fascinating. So it all happened because of that embankment. Right, now we've got caught up again. He turned to Nant Hall, and he decided to turn it into a hotel. The problem was that for his guests to go to the beach, they'd have to go all the way into Prestatyn, through the level crossing at the station, and walk down. And yet the beach was literally, 3 minutes walk from the hotel. So he approached the railway company, he persuaded them to build a bridge. And that's the Botnet Bridge. That was finished in 1891. And then he built a nice curved road leading from the bridge, sweeping around to Nant Hall Road for his customers to get into town. That's what it looks like now. You can't see it now, but you'll notice that they also added a road going the other way to Moston. Then he had turned his attention to the town itself, the side of the railway. And in 1892, he built the first gasworks in Prestatyn. That's Lidl's, that's the roof of Lidl's. And that's where he put his gasworks. I haven't been able to find a photograph of his gasworks, but I know that in 1909 the council bought it from him, a forced purchase. And they used it until 1937, and then they built a new modern building just over the road from it. You probably remember that. They used to call it Prestatyn Castle, didn't they? It looks like a building, it's not. It's a machine that's coated in bricks. It's a big steel structure machine, and the bricks just sort of pinned to it, really. It's a retort of some kind. It was the only one of its kind in Britain. And then, of course, when North Sea gas came along, they knocked it down. I took that photograph in 1988. from the railway bridge. Some gasometers there. Henry Pochin died in 1895, and his daughter took over the estate officially, although she'd been the real boss for years. She carried on developing Prestatyn. She built a shelter on the beach. There. That is the beach house. That's the house I told you about that he built for himself. I think they knocked it down in the 1960s. I can't remember which one. Can anybody remember?
It used to be owned by Ollie's. People called Holly owned it.
Yeah.
It was like a flat house, but for someone else.
No rider. And the following year, she placed the commemorative Jubilee fountain next to the shelter on the promenade. I don't know much about the beach cafe. I remember it as a child, but she built that thing. That appeared later, obviously, and that's that beach house again there, the fountain. In 1905, she leased some of the land off Barkby Avenue to the newly founded golf club. And in 1907, they built a wooden clubhouse opposite to where the entrance to Pontins is now. I'll end here because it isn't about Laura McLaren, but I will finish with one final picture of her opening what became the Scala Cinema. It was opened in 1900 as the town hall, but it wasn't a town hall. It was a solicitor called Fowkes Roberts. It was just he decided to call it. The council didn't have a say in it, and it was a private venture. It consisted of 3 mock-up shops with offices above the shop, a house above, and a 1,000-seater hall. But it became a cinema in 1913, Cerrone. Remember Cerrone? And there's the same view today. She died in France in 1933, and she's buried with her family in the mausoleum at Botmont. Her husband died the following year. She seems to be a forgotten person. I was quite upset because I went into Rhuddlan Library some years ago and they had an exhibition about the suffragette movement. And she wasn't there. Neither was Agnes Heap. It was as though they never existed. Pochin wasn't mentioned. So here's a summary of her life. It's incredible. She had attended the first public women's suffrage meeting at which her mother had spoken. After her marriage, she became a member of the executive committee of the London National Society of Women's Suffrage. She served on the executive committee of the Central National Society of Women's Suffrage. In 1890, she prepared a summary of the evidence presented to the House of Lords on the sweating system of labour on behalf of the Women's Liberal Federation. In 1908, she published a pamphlet, Better and Happier, which answered all the criticisms from the opposition, and they were silly. I don't know if you've done much reading about it. The objections that were being raised against women's suffrage were absolutely mind-blowingly stupid, the things they were saying. In fact, it makes me think of somebody in America now. Sorry. Just devised. She wrote the preliminary draft of the Women's Charter of Rights and Liberties. During the First World War, she ran a nursing home for officers in her London home. She was made a Lady of Grace of the Order of St John of Jerusalem. After suffrage was granted, she carried on her interest in feminist issues as a member of the Open Door Council. And the Times obituary described her as one of the foremost horticulturists in Europe and a painter of merit. And did they mention women's suffrage? No. it. It's all there, you know, in Prestatyn if you go. All the old buildings are there. It's quite surprising. Any questions?
And when was the main road built to Rhuddlan?
1920. Don't quote me, 1 or 2 years. 1921? 22? Yes.
But was there a road to Rhuddlan? So it'd be by Bell Cemetery, would it be?
Yes, at the top of the sandy one.
The
Yeah,
one at the bottom.
the upper one, that's right. Yes. Because the lower part wasn't passable really. It had the same.
I remember the father that when they built that new road on the coast road below Bells, they used to have motorbike racing on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They started that up again about 20 years ago for a short time.
Oh.
Yeah. But it met with a lot of opposition. Yes.
Well, they used to have number 1 High Street at the bottom there.
Would that be on the side of the coal merchant side?
Yes, he was the estate agent.
Roberts?
Yeah, he was the estate agent there.
Yeah. Used to be a nice gardening shop there.
Yes, Roberts is.
It's one of those shops when you went to that had the smell, didn't it? Yes.
Just in line with your comments on suffragettes, wonderful story in the 1920s when the Conservatives were totally against the women having the vote. One Conservative stood out and he said, yes, they should have it. The horror of his values. He said, think about it. He said, if we give women a vote, they'll obey their husbands or it'll double our vote.
I started looking at this because of my interest is melodom, and I was one of the things I was looking at was property rights for women up until the rules changed, where women could actually own their own property, and the things that went on. For instance, the Dawson family, they were well known for producing rather nice daughters, and they used to marry them off to the clergy. And the clergy around this area became quite wealthy because they were getting all the Dawson money, you know. That's it.
One man's vision from marshland to a town. I hope you were all interested in that. I mean, it was particularly local. I'm sure many of you remember bits of the progress that was made in making Prestatyn what it is today. Mr Pochin brought water to Prestatyn. We bring wine to you.
It will not go unappreciated.
When the first time that Robert came to talk to us, I said, what is your fee? He said, I do like a glass of port. So the last time I spoke to Robert and said, what is your fee? He said, I am not a teetotaler. So from that I gathered he wanted another bottle. Robert, thank you very much indeed. And I know you're coming back to us in the future.
I tell you what,
I can't remember when, but you are in the diary.
I've done a film on the development of the Queen's Theatre in Rhyl.
That's the one.
And its eventual destruction. And I will show you where Venice was, because I know where it was. And it includes the development of the winter gardens over by Marine Lake. And that was a very mysterious sort of thing. It's all there, just nobody's ever written about it. I tried to do original research, don't copy other people's stuff.
And that's the difference between using a microphone and not using a microphone. Thank you very much indeed. Where's the man with the raffle? Oh, he's here.
Prestatyn,